In our last video, we're going to finish up these transactions, and then I'm going to have one other thing to add before we finish up chapter 1. Here's our fourth transaction. Again, we're showing these in the context of the accounting equation. Now we've earned some revenue. We've earned service revenue by providing services. We collect the cash immediately. Here's where we were before this transaction. And obviously you can see that we've added cash at $5,500. And then we're going to add to the other side of the accounting equation in equity service revenues. Transaction 5. This time we're going to perform a service, but we're not going to get paid immediately. Remember, we talked about this. This is a special example. This is a certain type of asset we talked about. Here's where we were before. And our new asset, the one you've probably not heard of yet, is called accounts receivable. Accounts receivable, $3,000. And then we're going to add to our service revenues as well, $3,000. And so that's where we end up after transaction 5. Accounts receivable goes up, revenue goes up, assets go up, equity goes up. Transaction 6, we pay $3,200 in cash expenses. $2,000 of that is for rent, and $1,200 of it is for employee salaries. Here's where we were before this transaction occurred. You can see the cash decreasing on the cash side, and then we add both of our expenses and our salaries to the equity side as minuses. I said add them, but really I could have said subtract. Remember, those are going to be decreases to equity. The expenses are going to be decreases to equity. Transaction 7, we're paying $300 to the store that we purchased the office supplies from in transaction 3. You'll note, here's where we were when we started. We had an accounts payable for $500 sitting here on our books. We owed $500 before we paid it off, or paid some of it off. You can see the $300 coming out of cash and $300 coming out of accounts payable. So cash goes down, accounts payable goes down, both one side decrease, other side decrease, accounting equation still in balance. Transaction 8, now we're going to collect ourselves from money that we did work for previously. This is where we were before this transaction started. You can see cash had a balance of $12,000. Accounts receivable had a balance of $3,000. There's the cash being received, and we're decreasing accounts receivable. Why are we decreasing accounts receivable? Well, we're not owed $3,000 anymore. And so we have to decrease that accounts receivable in order to reflect the fact that we've been paid what we're owed. Last transaction, we distribute $5,000 cash dividend to a shareholder. Here's where we were before we started. You can see cash went down $5,000. And again, here this is an example of a dividend. Dividends decrease our equity, and so our equity goes down $5,000. But again, our accounting equation is still in balance. Last point I'll make before we get to the very last slide. This is what our transactions look like as a result of all these transactions. You can see there's a lot here. 9 transactions occurred, and we've kind of put them all in the different categories. You can see at the end we have $30,500 in assets and $30,500 in equity and liabilities. That's where we end up. That's the accounting equation in action, and that's how we record all these transactions. Now, before we finish up this chapter, I do want to bring up this slide. This is the slide that I show to my students at the end of the first class, preferably, just to kind of get them to do something before the next class. There's 2 equations in the top left corner. Debit equals left side, credit equals right side. And then there's what looks like a big T with a list of items on the left side: asset, expenses, dividends, and liabilities, revenues, common stock on the right side. So if you're looking at this video, watching this video, and you're not going to watch chapter 2 for a couple days, write this down. Look at this a couple times before you look at the chapter 2 video. Maybe even memorize it. If you were to memorize this, you would thank me later. Trust me, you would thank me later if you memorized this. Wow, that was a really helpful thing I memorized. Good luck. And the chapter 2 video should pretty much start off right where we left off here.